On June 19, 1863, Major General Gordon Granger, the commander of the Union Army's 13th Corps, was in command of about 2,000 soldiers dispatched to Texas to defeat the last surviving regiment of the Army of the Confederate States, or a little over 1,000 mounted riflemen who were comprised of members of the Cherokee, Creek, Seminole, and Osage nations, amongst what were essentially radicalized factions of the former civilized Indian nations, a people with whom, even before the Indian Removal Act of 1830, the Union had been in what might fairly be described as contentious relations, if not low-level conflict and hostilities, interrupted by a station identification break in a war to restore the Union after several slave-holding states had moved to secede. And on June 19, 1863, Major General Granger did not read aloud the Emancipation Proclamation, but did publish a military order, General Order Number 3, which was read aloud at several locations throughout Galveston, Texas, which stated that the people of Texas are informed that in accordance with the proclamation from the Executive of the United States, all slaves are free. This involves an absolute equality of personal rights and rights of property between former masters and slaves, and the connection heretofore existing between them becomes that between employer and hired labor. The freedmen are advised to remain quietly at their present homes and work for wages. They are informed that they will not be allowed to collect in military posts and that they will not be supported in idleness either there or elsewhere. Hello, my name is Major Mike Webb, and I am running for Arlington Public School Board. But I am also a retired Army officer, field grade officer, who is not only in his third generation removed from slavery by emancipation, but also a third generation Army officer who had just happened to have graduated from a school in the Shenandoah Valley that is often called General Lee's College, next door to Virginia Military Institute, VMI, where Ralph Northam attended, and where the former commanding general for the Army of Northern Virginia and former executive for the plantation at Arlington House spent his last years as college president. And so, for the next few minutes, let's just examine the celebration of one day selected in history as distinguishable from similarly situated others. Because, as most may acknowledge, on any given day, just about anything might happen for which we can celebrate, including births and deaths of famous people, discoveries and inventions, victories and defeats in battle, or just about anything on any given day. But on June 17th, 2020, in Executive Order Number 66, Virginia Governor Ralph Northam proclaimed that since 1619, when both representative democracy and enslaved persons arrived in Virginia, we have struggled to live up to our proclaimed ideals of freedom and justice for all. And most persons would probably agree with that. He proclaimed that we have failed time and again to guarantee to all Americans the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And most persons would probably agree with that. He proclaimed that we have said one thing but consistently done another. And most persons would probably agree even with that. He proclaimed that the year 2020 has cast fear, violence, and tragedy upon our nation and our Commonwealth. And most persons would probably agree with that. And he proclaimed that we have persevered through a worldwide pandemic, wept over the senseless loss of lives, and lifted voices in protest while confronting the elusiveness of justice. And most persons would probably agree with much of that. And he announced that this Friday, June 19, 2020, Juneteenth, is, as it is also known, marks the anniversary of the day in 1865 when news of the Emancipation Proclamation reached Texas, the last of the former Confederate states to abolish slavery. He describes that as a pivotal moment in American history when all enslaved black people finally learned they were free people, as a moment of celebration and joy, and as a moment when America finally took a step closer to its promise of freedom, equality, and justice for all, emphasizing that we know that there is much more to be done and many more steps to be taken. And he declared that on this day, we will educate ourselves on our history, all of our history. We will reflect on how our nation and our Commonwealth failed to recognize the humanity of all people, and we will celebrate the end of enslavement and redouble our efforts to rid our society of its shameful legacy of racism, discrimination, and inequity. But as we educate ourselves on our history, all of our history, the first question posed is whether June 19th, or Juneteenth, as they say, marks the anniversary of the day in 1865 when news of the Emancipation Proclamation reached Texas, the last of the former Confederate states to abolish slavery. Well, according to the National Park Service, on April 9th, 1865, General Robert E. Lee surrendered to Lieutenant General Ulysses S. Grant at the McLean House in Appomattox County, Virginia, where 4,600 enslaved people resided and represented over half of the population in that county. But even 1 year after the anniversary of the surrender at Appomattox Courthouse, the Freedmen's Bureau, as acknowledged by the National Park Service, under the Department of the Army, found their efforts met by staunch hostilities from local residents, with little support from the Congress, very similar to contemporaneous conditions in places like the city of Alexandria, where only short-term gains were made by Republicans in electing emancipated slaves to city government in the 1870s. And the official city website acknowledges that its enactment of Jim Crow laws specifically ensured that, even to this day, no Republican has ever been elected as a mayor again. So as a reasonable person looking at this historical day, June 19, 1865, would one be led to believe that a general parading around from location to location in Galveston, Texas, to announce to the entire state of Texas for all to hear that all slaves were freed had any effect at all beyond that which was purely symbolic. According to the National Park Service, Justice Ola Lee, an 89-year-old Texas resident who became so excited when she learned about the Juneteenth holiday that she began a walking tour from city to city and even rushed to the White House to witness the signing of the new law. Fannie Berry had been a slave in Appomattox County and was very excited, like the almost 5,000 slaves in that Virginia municipality, before the realities of denied access to economic and educational opportunities arose. It was the victory of the Union Army, augmented by colored troop regiments dispatched to demoralize their opposition over the Confederate forces, that triggered their joys as enslaved people that freedom had arrived with the battle victory. But militarily, Lieutenant General Stand Watie, commander of the Mounted Rifle Regiment, had not yet surrendered to Union forces on June 19, 1865. Had in fact refused to even recognize the surrender of General Lee's forces back in April, and would not surrender to the Union until June 23, 1865, raising concerns as a military order if it was issued simply to demoralize the opposition, because General Granger lacked any authority to compel the people of Texas to recognize the Emancipation Proclamation. Or perhaps what we're saying is that because Lieutenant General Stand Watie was not a white officer, but just a Native American, it didn't matter if he had surrendered at all. This briefing is unclassified, as you were. My name is Major Mike Webb, and by God, I am running for Arlington Public School Board. Let's keep Mike Webb away from our schools. Honest. Carry on.
This advertisement was authorized by Mike Webb.
End of the day, I really don't give a damn. It's not my department. Honest. And y'all going back now. Here. Honest.